For several weeks, the fastest car in the world has come from China. The Yingguang U9, an electric sports car from the manufacturer BYD, managed to reach an impressive speed of 496 kilometers per hour. Behind this remarkable performance, the message sent to the whole world is perfectly clear. The technological supremacy of Europeans in the automotive field is coming to an end, and this record represents only the visible part of it. In the background, Chinese car manufacturers have already taken far more advanced steps. Supported by a particularly dynamic state capitalism and a high-tech industry, they have achieved what few thought possible just a few years ago, establishing a lasting presence in the European automobile market. BYD, MG, Xiaoping, Zeekr, Chinese electric cars are experiencing rapid growth and are multiplying on our streets. Faced with this rise in power, European manufacturers, who must phase out combustion engines by 2035, have fallen considerably behind their Chinese competitors. Renault, Volkswagen, Stellantis, and BMW could disappear much sooner than one might imagine. How did we get here? Why do Chinese manufacturers have such a lead? Do European brands still have the ability to turn the situation around? As you will see, the situation appears particularly compromised. Between controversial political decisions, millions of jobs at stake, and a remarkable Chinese industry, to understand it all, you're in the right place. You're on OPAL. Before we begin, this video is made in partnership with our sponsor of the day, NordVPN. For those who don't know it yet, NordVPN is a software that helps you protect your data and strengthen your online privacy. Indeed, with NordVPN, you can virtually change the location of your IP address, which proves to be particularly convenient. For example, today our main topic will largely focus on China. If you go to China for vacation, it is strongly recommended to use a VPN, as access to the internet there is subject to significant restrictions. Platforms like Google, YouTube, Instagram, or WhatsApp are not accessible in China. However, with NordVPN, you can maintain your usual access to these services. Beyond travel, it is also very useful for accessing the catalogs of streaming services available internationally. It is very easy to access the American Netflix catalog, which is generally larger than the one offered in France, and that's not all. Indeed, thanks to its threat protection feature, which remains active even without a VPN connection, NordVPN automatically blocks dangerous websites, including those associated with phishing attempts. NordVPN also blocks online trackers that collect your data for commercial purposes, as well as intrusive pop-up ads that may appear on the internet. With NordVPN, it is possible to connect up to 10 devices at the same time, which allows you to protect your phone, tablet, computer, or even your smart TV with a single subscription. It's really convenient. Currently, a promotional offer is available with this subscription. By choosing a 2-year subscription, you get 4 additional months free. A 30-day money-back guarantee is offered, which is ideal for trying out the service. I would like to point out that this offer is exclusively accessible through the link provided in the description. So, don't hesitate to take advantage of it. A huge thank you to NordVPN for supporting my work. As for us, we are leaving for China. However, ChatGPT's native speech recognition has trouble keeping up with the flow of my thoughts, whereas Whisper Flow clarifies it instantly. Here is what I would have written if I had been at my desk. Here is the result when I dictate to ChatGPT, and here is the one obtained using Whisper Flow with ChatGPT. To fully grasp everything I am going to explain, as well as the reasons why the Chinese industry today represents a major challenge for European car manufacturers, we need to go back several decades, because what is happening today is the result of a long and methodical process. Everything therefore begins in China at the end of the 1970s. At that time, the country was going through a period of profound upheaval. The historic leader Mao Zedong has just passed away. He leaves behind a country marked by decades of collectivism, where agriculture remains largely manual in the countryside, where the economy advances slowly, and where China remains almost isolated from the rest of the world. It is in this unique context, marked by disorder and uncertainty, that a new figure emerges at the head of the Chinese state, determined to profoundly transform the country's destiny, Deng Xiaoping. Unlike his predecessor, Deng Xiaoping is not an ideologue but rather a pragmatist. From his rise to power in 1978, he initiated what would become one of the most significant economic turning points of the 20th century, the opening of China to the world. In practical terms, Deng Xiaoping relaxed the control exercised by the state and paved the way for foreign investment. The first special economic zones came into being, notably that of Shenzhen, which was still just a fishing village of about 10,000 inhabitants in 1979, before later becoming a metropolis of around 15 million people. Very quickly, the effects of the reforms initiated by Deng Xiaoping become noticeable. In the early 1980s, foreign companies poured in, employment recovered, wages rose, and quite rapidly, an entirely new Chinese middle class emerged. This new middle class is rapidly aspiring to enjoy all the benefits of modern life, notably the ability to move around easily, which is leading to a sharp increase in demand for vehicles across the entire country. The main problem at that time is that the Chinese industry is still in its early stages. There are indeed a few car manufacturers such as FAW or SAIC, but at that time their level of expertise was still limited. They do not yet have the necessary capabilities to produce vehicles on a large scale. The Chinese government then finds itself somewhat overwhelmed by the situation and decides to quickly seek a solution. The solution that quickly becomes evident is to invite companies experienced in large-scale vehicle production to operate on Chinese territory. Such an initiative immediately arouses the interest of many European manufacturers, such as Mercedes or Volkswagen. Volkswagen and also Peugeot see it as an excellent opportunity to establish themselves in a promising market with considerable potential. In this newly opening market, the Chinese government nevertheless sets certain conditions for establishment. Access is not completely free. The main condition is to be required to create a joint venture with a Chinese manufacturer when setting up what is called a joint venture. The underlying idea behind this measure is quite clever. It aims to encourage a transfer of skills. Indeed, the agreement is based on the following principle. Foreign manufacturers can gain access to a very large market, but in return, they must share some of their know-how with a Chinese company and, above all, train its staff, from production technicians to design office engineers. For the Chinese government, this strategy represents an effective way to quickly make up for its lag and take advantage of the experience of the most successful players. The first European manufacturer to take the plunge was Volkswagen in 1984, and this initiative met with great success. Volkswagen entered into a partnership with the Chinese manufacturer SAIC. Together, they are going to launch large-scale production in China of the Volkswagen Santana, a sedan already considered fairly basic for its time, but which will become a true classic on the local market. The reason is that it stands out for its great reliability and affordable price. It has established itself as the preferred car for taxis, private individuals, and even Chinese government agencies, thus illustrating its immense success. In just a few years, Volkswagen established itself as the #1 in China, and of course, such success did not go unnoticed. Very quickly, the other European manufacturers also decide to follow suit. Peugeot, Citroën, Mercedes, and BMW all want to secure their share of the market and in turn form joint ventures with local companies. Thus, in barely 10 years, European vehicles began to take over the Chinese market on a large scale. However, events will not unfold as planned. Indeed, the problem that will soon arise is that these well-known joint venture contracts will not always be fully respected by the European manufacturers. In theory, these agreements were supposed to be beneficial for both parties. The Europeans could expand their customer base, while the Chinese learned to manufacture these vehicles at the same time. But in reality, the European manufacturers are not naive. They have fully understood the strategy put in place by Beijing. They know perfectly well that these partnerships are mainly intended to acquire their know-how in order to be able, sooner or later, to replace them. They have therefore taken the necessary measures to protect themselves. Their core technologies are absolutely not shared with their Chinese partners. For example, the engines of the Volkswagen Santana were directly imported from Germany. The same applied to the gearboxes. As a result, those well-known joint ventures quickly turned into mere assembly plants, lacking any real added value. Well, that's roughly what is going to happen across all industrial sectors in China, not just in the automotive one. At that time, companies around the world were taking advantage of the low cost of Chinese labor to make significant profits. China thus found itself confined to the role of subcontractor, a situation that would earn it, by the late 1990s, the unflattering nickname of the world's workshop. Thanks to these factories, China has indeed reindustrialized and become somewhat wealthier, but the country has not truly increased its skills, even though that was the original goal, a situation that, as one might expect, greatly irritates the Chinese leaders. The Communist Party perceives this situation as a real humiliation. Indeed, since the 1980s, Western countries have sometimes adopted a condescending attitude toward it. They take advantage of their markets by using their labor force while denying them access to genuine know-how. Thus, from the early 2000s, the Chinese Communist Party decided to adopt a new strategy. China has finished with its role as the world's workshop and now wishes to regain control of its industry by freeing itself from foreign dependence. And, more than ever, China now wishes to create its own major leading companies. To achieve this goal, the Chinese government will reintroduce a method that did not win unanimous support in the past, but will prove particularly effective in its new form: planning. Planning is one of the foundations of the communist system. It is based on the principle that the state organizes and regulates the entire economy, determining what must be produced, where, when, how, and at what cost. The main objective of this approach is to reduce market uncertainties by eliminating competition and limiting individual profits. Thus, the entire economy is organized collectively, in accordance with a broad national plan defined by the government, hence the term planning. So much for the theory. In practice, planning can be applied in a more or less flexible way. Under Mao's government, planning was particularly rigid, inspired by the Soviet model, which involved a complete collectivization of the means of production. As you know, things did not turn out very satisfactorily. This led to one of the most severe famines in China's history. Thus, this very rigid planning model will gradually evolve in the country, while remaining present in various forms. Under Deng Xiaoping, a much more flexible planning model emerged, combining state direction with market mechanisms. In concrete terms, the state defines the overall direction, objectives, and priorities, thereby establishing a national roadmap, and then allows the provinces, public enterprises, and even the private sector to determine the best ways to achieve these objectives. The state therefore adopts a much less interventionist approach than before. It mainly confines itself to funding certain projects through grants and ensuring that everyone moves in the same direction, making adjustments when necessary. Thus, this form of hybrid planning, which combines aspects of communism and the market economy, will eventually be referred to by specialists as socialism with Chinese characteristics. This new model is greatly strengthened under the impetus of Jiang Zemin, who succeeded Deng Xiaoping as head of the Chinese Communist Party in 1989. Jiang Zemin stands out for his engineering background, a profile that would become the standard for most Chinese leaders who succeeded him. Jiang Zemin will transform this model of socialism with Chinese characteristics into a powerful lever for national development. In the early 2000s, it was indeed he who launched the major national programs mentioned earlier, aimed at modernizing the country and, above all, strengthening its autonomy with respect to Western powers. The flagship project of these various programs is undoubtedly the Three Gorges Dam, the largest hydroelectric structure in the world, inaugurated in 2003. But beyond the dam, many other sectors have also been made priorities and have benefited from government support. This has notably involved high-speed trains, aeronautics with Comac, but also, and above all, the automobile industry. At that time, the objective of the Communist Party was clear: to bring forth entirely Chinese car manufacturers capable of developing without relying on foreign technologies. Thus, at the beginning of the 2000s, several Chinese manufacturers, such as FAW, followed the directions of the central government and began designing internal combustion engines themselves. However, between ambition and industrial reality, there remains a significant gap. The results of these tests have proven to be inconclusive. In terms of performance and reliability, the fully Chinese engines turn out to be extremely disappointing. Very quickly in China, faced with the unconvincing results of these tests, everyone realizes that it will be impossible to make up for the 80 years of advantage held by Western countries in the design of internal combustion engine vehicles. This realization then leads them to make a bold decision. Yes, France is going through a difficult period, but you are not destined to fail with it, for history provides the proof. When a country goes through a period of decline, some collapse, but others emerge more resilient than ever. And today, the French who? At the beginning of the 2000s, an electric car looked like this. A few bold European manufacturers embarked on the design of experimental prototypes. Some vehicles with internal combustion engines are even converted into electric models and mass-produced. This was notably the case in France with the Citroën Saxo Électrique and the Clio Electro. Listen carefully, because you can hardly hear anything, apart from a slight whistling sound. This is not fiction, it's a technological breakthrough. Here is the Clio Electro. Maximum speed, 110 kilometers per hour, with a range of 80 kilometers in urban conditions. However, all these projects will quickly be abandoned for a simple reason. They arouse no interest among the public. The autonomy is very limited, the reliability almost non-existent, and above all, the cost remains particularly high. At that time, a mid-range petrol Clio cost around 80,000 francs. For an electric Clio, the price reached around 150,000 francs, battery included, or almost double. Thus, sales of these vehicles are really struggling to take off, and these electric car projects are quickly set aside. However, more than 10,000 kilometers away, some people are quietly observing the situation with great attention. Noting that Europeans are gradually turning away from the electric vehicle market, Chinese players see a real strategic opportunity there. Indeed, it is still a relatively new field, where China does not suffer from any historical lag, as is the case with combustion engines. Moreover, research and development have not yet been fully exploited there. Everything is just beginning, and there is still much to be accomplished. It is at this moment that China takes on a bold challenge. In 2006, under the leadership of Hu Jintao, successor to Jiang Zemin, the Chinese government launches a plan of unprecedented scale. The objective set by the government is perfectly explicit. China aims to become a leading player in the field of electric vehicles by 2020. To achieve this goal, China is fully mobilizing the resources and mechanisms specific to its socialist development model. The government is committed to providing substantial financial assistance to any Chinese company wishing to invest in this sector. And this will bear fruit. Thanks to all these subsidies, many companies that had until now been distant from the automotive field will enthusiastically enter this sector. This will notably be the case for a company called BYD, which until now has specialized in manufacturing batteries for mobile phones, but will radically change its focus thanks to this extensive support program. Like this company, no fewer than about 15 other Chinese manufacturers, such as Geely, JAC, and Chery, are going to enter the field of electric vehicles, and the results will not take long to appear. In 2010, Wang Shuangfu, the CEO of BYD, presented the very first fully designed electric car in China, the BYD E6. The central government, aware of the company's strategic potential, will therefore grant it exceptional support. The city of Shenzhen, BYD's historical birthplace, is set to become a true open-air laboratory for the manufacturer. Beijing is asking local authorities to award all public contracts to BYD. This is how the roughly 1,500 buses in the city will be completely replaced by 100% electric models manufactured by BYD. In the same spirit, the city's taxi drivers also benefit from substantial subsidies to purchase the BYD E6. The Chinese state thus offers the young company what any manufacturer could dream of: a guaranteed customer, considerable volumes, and, above all, a vast testing platform. Indeed, each BYD bus and taxi represents a valuable source of data that fuels the company's research and development while accelerating its growth. This example clearly illustrates the effectiveness of the Chinese model. When the government sets a goal, it ensures it has the means to achieve it. Thanks to its centralized governance, it can easily adjust economic rules in the national interest, then return to a market model once the momentum is underway. Thus, thanks to this particularly favorable government support, BYD was already beginning to grow considerably in the early 2010s. However, a major problem still remains. BYD cars are practical, economical, and quite reliable, but their design remains unattractive. And that represents a major problem, especially in the Chinese market. Indeed, in this country, the car is a strong social symbol, much more than in many other places, and this is deeply rooted in the local culture. In reality, this is explained by the relatively late introduction of cars in the country. In the 1980s, owning an elegant sedan, particularly a European one, in a country that was just opening up to the world, represented the height of sophistication. It was something that no one had ever seen before. Over time, this idea has become deeply rooted in habits. Even today, owning a nice car in China is often seen as a sign of success and prestige. You can therefore understand a little better why BYD's simpler models are sometimes overlooked. They lack elegance and prestige. However, the problem does not concern BYD alone. In fact, the entire electric vehicle sector is suffering from this unfavorable image. It is the image of a technology often perceived as less prestigious and less efficient than that of combustion engines. Faced with this difficulty, in the early 2010s, Chinese manufacturers did not really have a solution. What they have developed over the past 30 years is their industrial know-how, rather than their marketing skills. But fortunately for them, this sector is going to receive a major boost at that time, support coming straight from California. Indeed, at the same time, in the region, a young, innovative company is beginning to lay the foundations for the vehicle of tomorrow. A modern, high-performance, and attractive electric car. This brand, well known to everyone, is none other than Tesla. When Tesla delivered its first Model S vehicles in 2012, the public reception was rather mixed. The model draws attention, without however being the major event of the year. And that is not really justified, because the real revolution is indeed present. Indeed, for the first time, a fully electric car truly seems capable of competing with the best combustion engine cars on the market. The Model S accelerates from 0 to 100 kilometers per hour in under 5 seconds, offers more than 400 kilometers of range, and features a design worthy of the greatest European manufacturers. Elon Musk has just accomplished what many manufacturers have failed to do: make electric cars truly appealing. However, the most important aspect lies in the philosophy that inspires it. Indeed, Elon Musk was the first to understand that an electric car should not blindly reproduce all the principles of a combustion vehicle. Indeed, all the electric cars I have mentioned so far, the Clio Electro, the BYD E6, and the Saxo Electrique, were based on combustion vehicle architectures, from which the combustion engine had simply been removed to install a battery and an electric motor. It was actually a makeshift solution, which is easy to understand given the very limited sales of these electric vehicles. Designing a specific architecture for these vehicles of a new type represented a particularly risky gamble for any manufacturer. It was precisely at that moment that Tesla set itself apart through its innovative approach. The company had the audacity to take that step forward. The Tesla Model S is the first car in the world designed from the ground up around an architecture entirely dedicated to electric power, and that truly changes everything. The batteries are no longer located under the hood but are integrated into the chassis, which improves the vehicle's balance and, above all, makes it possible to install higher capacity batteries, thereby providing better range. The electric motor is no longer placed under the hood, but directly on the axles. This greatly simplifies the mechanics, an aspect that, as you will see, will play a decisive role later on. Finally, the latest major innovation of the Tesla Model S, made possible by its new architecture and expected to profoundly transform the entire global automotive industry, lies in its software approach. Very well, let's go a little deeper into the subject, because this aspect is also essential. Until now, and for many years, cars with combustion engines were designed according to the following principle. They are designed around a central mechanical assembly, the famous trio of engine, gearbox, and transmission. This is what is called in the field the powertrain. In other words, the powertrain assembly in French. The powertrain is the central component of a combustion vehicle. It determines all the essential parameters, such as the chassis configuration, the weight distribution, and the position of the wheels. Once the powertrain has been designed, it generally does not undergo any significant changes. It is then considered a fixed system. It is only afterwards that all the additional components are added around it: the cooling system, the alternator to supply the cabin with electricity, and the hydraulic circuit. Each of these systems operates autonomously, with its own specific sensors. The only element common to these systems is their connection to the engine block, on which they depend. Apart from that, they each operate in a separate and fragmented way. In the new architecture of the Tesla Model S, the approach is the opposite. All the systems operate in an integrated manner. This integration is made possible by the central role of the software, which replaces the fixed combustion engine and acts as a modular unit, a true conductor of the vehicle. Indeed, in the Tesla Model S, everything relies on a central operating system, a true digital brain that oversees the entire vehicle, from braking to entertainment, including battery management and automated driving. Everything is coordinated by the software. To understand it well, the Tesla Model S can be seen as a genuine computer on wheels, powered by a battery. It is truly the most relevant comparison. Admittedly, recent combustion engine vehicles also have an onboard computer, but its function remains relatively limited. They are limited to centralizing the information transmitted by the sensors and displaying it on the dashboard, without going any further. At Tesla, the concept has been developed in a much more advanced way, and this complete integration of software into an electric vehicle is truly innovative. Tesla's intuition proved so relevant that this approach remains today the benchmark in the design of all electric vehicles. The main drawback of this approach lies in the fact that, for a manufacturer, everything has to be designed and programmed independently, since all the components of the electric vehicle must interact smoothly and consistently through the software. The manufacturing of your vehicle must therefore be organized according to a vertical integration model. It is moreover for this reason that Tesla has vast production facilities, known as gigafactories. This is explained by the fact that the company produces almost all of its vehicle components in-house in order to ensure optimal consistency and harmony. Thus, it is essential to understand that a combustion vehicle and an electric vehicle, although similar in appearance, are fundamentally different in their internal design. These are two entirely distinct approaches and conceptions. In short, starting in 2012, Tesla established a truly new standard for electric vehicles with the launch of its Model S. Meanwhile, in China, people observe and learn, while in Europe, on the other side of the Atlantic, people remain relatively inactive. At that time in Europe, while Tesla was already transforming the world of electric vehicles in the early 2010s, people remained firmly attached to the idea of clean diesel, relying on small, carefully optimized combustion engines equipped with particulate filters. These engines fully comply with the new stringent environmental standards imposed by the European Union. They passed the anti-pollution tests without difficulty, which suggests a promising future for European manufacturers. The traditional diesel engine still seems to have some good years ahead of it. Only Renault appears a bit more daring than its competitors. Under the leadership of Carlos Ghosn, the group unveiled in March 2013 its first fully electric city car, the Renault Zoe. However, many at the time considered this initiative to be going against the tide, and the Renault Zoe remained merely a curiosity. However, all of this will radically change 2 years later. Indeed, In September 2015, revelations from the EPA, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, had a resounding impact. Volkswagen, which had meanwhile become the world's largest automobile manufacturer, is accused of having intentionally installed software capable of detecting emissions testing phases in its vehicles. During these phases, the software automatically reduces the emissions of the tested engine so that it easily complies with the standards in force. Once on the road, the restriction deactivates and the engine returns to its usual operation, emitting up to 15 to 20 times more than the permitted levels, which is considerable. In this case, Volkswagen will suffer serious consequences. The scandal is taking on a truly global dimension. More than 11 million vehicles from the group are affected by this irregularity and will therefore have to be temporarily taken out of service. Volkswagen will be fined $2.8 billion by the United States Department of Justice, an unprecedented amount. And that's not all. It will quickly be discovered that other manufacturers, such as BMW or Mercedes, outside the Volkswagen Group, have also taken advantage of the margins in emissions tests to optimize their results. What seemed to be an isolated case ultimately turns out to be a large-scale crisis. The idea of clean diesel then loses all credibility. It is a deeply embarrassing situation for Europe. The continent, once regarded as an exemplary model in the fight against global warming, is in fact turning out to be the main manufacturer of high-emission vehicles. You can imagine the European Union's political response will be commensurate with this delicate situation. Starting in 2016, rumors began to multiply. The European Commission is considering banning the sale of new vehicles with combustion engines by 2035. A decision that will lead all European manufacturers into the fastest and most profound transition in their history. Starting in 2016, European manufacturers are faced with a major challenge. They must completely reinvent themselves, and that in the shortest possible time. Imagine, overnight, some of the continent's largest companies had to give up the very element that had ensured their global success for more than a century, the combustion engine. The project therefore promises to be colossal. It will be necessary to compete with Tesla in a segment it has been developing for more than 10 years. And beyond this delay, the situation becomes even more complicated because of the way European manufacturers have designed their industrial model. Indeed, the field in which European manufacturers excel, and where they have so far been unbeatable, lies in the design of those famous powertrain systems mentioned earlier. European manufacturers are above all excellent mechanics, and that is where the heart of their expertise lies. Because yes, even if it may seem trivial since it has become so common, the combustion engines in our cars are true masterpieces of engineering. These are thousands of parts that move and vibrate at speeds of several thousand revolutions per minute, having to operate under all conditions, without breaking, overheating, or leaking. It is a mechanism of exceptional caliber, requiring remarkable expertise in machining the parts, selecting the alloys, and balancing. This is why Chinese manufacturers faced difficulties in the early 2000s in designing combustion engines, due to their extreme complexity. It's a level of sophistication that's hard to imagine when you simply see a Clio driving down the street. All in all, this shows that the culture of mechanics is deeply rooted and formative among European manufacturers, and that it has always been their main competitive advantage. So, now that this has been said, do you see where the problem lies? Yes, indeed, as I mentioned. In an electric vehicle, the mechanical part is much simpler, and significantly so, compared to that of a combustion vehicle. An electric motor simply relies on a magnet and a current that cause it to rotate. That of a Tesla, for example, has only about 20 moving parts. A four-cylinder TDI combustion engine from Volkswagen, a very common model found in vehicles such as the Golf and the Tiguan, doesn't have about 20 parts like an electric motor, but around 1,400. A Golf gearbox contains about 400 moving parts. In contrast, a Tesla has none, because its operation doesn't require them. An electric motor can reach up to 15,000 revolutions per minute and, above all, deliver its maximum torque right from the start, making the use of gear ratios unnecessary. It is for this reason, moreover, that electric vehicles offer particularly remarkable acceleration from 0 to 100 kilometers per hour. Thus, as you can see, there really is nothing comparable. To design a good electric vehicle, it is not enough to master mechanics. One must above all excel in battery and software management. It is now in these areas that the performance and range of electric cars are determined, and Tesla understood this long before the others. Here is where the real decisive turning point lies. With the rise of electric vehicles, European mechanical expertise, which had allowed them to dominate the competition for decades, no longer has the same usefulness. As early as 2016, groups such as Volkswagen, Mercedes, or BMW, employing hundreds of thousands of people, had to start again from a completely blank slate. It's impressive. They have to completely rethink their business model in a very short time, because until now, that of European manufacturers was based precisely on their comparative advantage, namely their mechanical expertise. European manufacturers focused mainly on producing powertrains, while they entrusted most of the rest of the production to subcontractors. All the peripheral systems for the engines, which I mentioned earlier, were produced by what are called specialized equipment manufacturers. For example, the German company Bosch is responsible for managing the injection systems and the onboard electronics. The French company Valeo, for its part, supplies the air conditioning systems, the front lighting, as well as the alternators. Another German player, Continental, mainly known for its tires, is also a major supplier of braking systems and sensors. All in all, this group of players had been working closely together for decades, an organization that proved particularly effective. Over time, each became specialized in their own area of excellence, the manufacturers in pure mechanics and the equipment suppliers in high-precision components. It was therefore a true symbiosis, but with the arrival of electric vehicles, this dynamic is going to change profoundly. Indeed, remember Tesla and its vertically integrated production model. It is in this direction that European manufacturers will have to evolve. However, the presence of many long-established subcontractors is likely to make this transformation particularly complex. Indeed, how can one produce an electric vehicle as well integrated as a Tesla when dozens of sensors come from different subcontractors, each using its own proprietary code, with no real compatibility between them? All in all, the situation is quickly becoming a real headache, and the most logical decision that most European manufacturers will then make will be to reduce their dependence on Bosch, Valeo, and Continental. They choose to focus on in-house development of all their components, and more specifically their software, thereby following Tesla's example. Thus, at the end of the 2010s, major long-established mechanical companies embarked with determination on the design of operating systems, seeking to compete with a young Silicon Valley company endowed with a strong software development culture since its beginnings. The situation is almost laughable, but as you can imagine, the consequences could be disastrous. The first European manufacturer to make this major change is, once again, Volkswagen. In 2019, the manufacturer created Cariad, a new subsidiary dedicated to software, designed to embody the group's profound digital transformation. Cariad's objective was to design a unified operating system for all of the group's brands, such as Audi, Porsche, Skoda, Seat, and of course Volkswagen. In theory, it was an excellent idea that could allow them to partially make up for their delay compared to Tesla and, above all, achieve significant economies of scale thanks to production volumes. However, they clearly underestimated the complexity of the task. When this new operating system was launched, the disappointment was considerable. Indeed, certain parts of the system are defective or incomplete. The interfaces lack smoothness, navigation shows irregularities, and some vehicles come to a halt unexpectedly. The first to suffer the consequences of this disorganization was the Volkswagen ID.3, the very first model in the manufacturer's new fully electric range, intended to symbolize the group's revival after the diesel scandal. And the difficulties didn't stop there, because producing electric vehicles is one thing, but successfully marketing them is another. Indeed, the demand for electric vehicles in Europe has not experienced spectacular growth, even with the prospect of the planned ban on combustion engines by 2035. The same difficulties as before persist. Prices remain high, and the charging infrastructure on the continent is still not sufficiently developed. There has nevertheless been a slight recovery in sales, notably thanks to the financial incentives of several thousand euros offered by some European governments to support the sector. However, the company that has benefited the most from it, as one might expect, is not European. It is, of course, Tesla. In 2019, the American manufacturer finally launched its Model 3 in Europe, marking its first attempt to enter the mid-range segment, and the success would be simply exceptional. It is at that moment that Tesla's stock will begin to experience a spectacular rise. On July 1, 2020, the company joined the very exclusive group of firms valued at more than $1 trillion. Elon Musk then becomes the richest person in the world and probably reaches the peak of his popularity at that moment. Tesla now seems unstoppable, and nothing appears capable of slowing its rise. For their part, European manufacturers are watching the situation with a certain concern. They too have invested billions in modernizing their production lines, searching for new battery suppliers, and upgrading their software, but the results are slow to materialize. However, what they do not yet know at that moment is that the main threat hanging over them is not Tesla's impressive success. What they should truly be wary of is the much quieter revolution taking place in China at the same time. The world is beginning to be cautious. It is a much more discreet revolution that is taking place in China at the same time. The world is becoming increasingly vigilant. It is a silent revolution in China, observed at the same moment. Many people ask me whether artificial intelligence represents a risk. Can one risk losing a lot of money? It's quite the opposite. For my part, I managed to generate passive income by harnessing the potential of artificial intelligence. If you apply the right method, I will explain why. I was an entrepreneur and earned 4,000 units per month. At present, I receive about 3,000 units per month. The difference for me is that 1 month depends on income, and the other month on the market. Moreover, the work effort I put in is really different. If you are a professional, you will understand that even though we work and sell our services, we still lack the means to achieve true financial independence. Why? I identified this problem from the start. After testing many approaches, I finally found a method to achieve financial independence. This also allows me to generate passive income. It's not just about me, but also about my students, my professional colleagues, retirees, and even my grandparents. They can all apply this effective method to generate passive income. Over all those years, between 2010 and 2020, many important events occurred in China. Remember, at that time, we mostly knew BYD's rather simple cars, which were still struggling to win over the general public. On the ground, the situation is evolving rapidly. As soon as Tesla makes its breakthrough in 2011 and paves the way, all the previously mentioned Chinese manufacturers rush to follow this direction. Indeed, for the Chinese, this transition takes place without the slightest difficulty. They do not have to question a century of mechanical heritage, unlike the Europeans. Very early on, well before the Dieselgate scandal, manufacturers like BYD, Geely, and Chery set out to design electric vehicles in the best possible way, that is, by adopting a software-focused approach from the very beginning. To these players are added new arrivals, such as Xiaoping, NIO, and Leapmotor, a generation of manufacturers that emerged after Tesla and that assert even more strongly their identity as technology companies. In 2013, Hu Jintao handed over the leadership of the Chinese Communist Party to Xi Jinping, a leader with a more ambitious profile, who would once again prove to be a powerful ally for all of these manufacturers. In 2015, he unveiled the Made in China 2025 program, undoubtedly one of the most ambitious government plans since the founding of the People's Republic of China in 1949, aimed at raising the country to the rank of a leading technological power by 2025. Xi Jinping's goal is clear. He no longer wishes merely to match Western countries, but to surpass them. 10 strategic sectors have been identified, among which are robotics, artificial intelligence, semiconductors, and, of course, electric vehicles. Literally tens of billions of yuan are being invested to support the development of these sectors. Completely new universities and research centers are emerging, specially designed to support the development of these cutting-edge technologies. As early as 2016, China was already training about 4.7 million engineers per year, nearly 8 times more than the United States over the same period, in absolute terms. For an equivalent population, that amounts to twice as much, which remains considerable. At the same time, the entire industrial fabric of the country is also being transformed. Thousands of small and medium-sized enterprises receive subsidies to modernize their production tools. Industrial lines are largely automated and robotized. The first major Chinese players in high technology are beginning to stand out, such as Huawei, Xiaomi, Tencent, and DJI. Cities like Shenzhen are beginning to compete with Silicon Valley, both in their dynamism and their capacity for innovation. All in all, the entire country is gradually evolving to become a vast ecosystem dedicated to innovation. And that, as you might imagine, represents a considerable advantage for Chinese electric vehicle manufacturers. Indeed, it is largely thanks to this that they will be able to establish the ideal model for electric vehicle production mentioned earlier, the famous vertical integration. They can easily achieve this, since all the necessary expertise is available locally, often even concentrated in a single city, Shenzhen. Among these skills, one of them will once again play a decisive role: battery production. Indeed, I have not mentioned it much yet, but batteries also represent a key strategic element in the field of electric vehicles, just as much as software. The reason is that the battery is by far the most expensive component of an electric vehicle. The battery accounts for about 40% of a vehicle's production costs when it leaves the factory, which is considerable. Thus, to develop an efficient ecosystem of electric vehicle manufacturers in your country, it is also essential to have high-quality battery manufacturers. One cannot exist or progress without the other. It is therefore quite logical that, from the early 2010s, the Communist Party strongly encouraged many companies to start producing batteries. When I speak of incentives, it is once again the same strategy: substantial subsidies, tax credits, and low-interest loans, among others, and once again, this approach has paid off. 2 Chinese companies have truly established themselves in this sector. The first is CATL. CATL is a company founded relatively recently, in 2011. To give an idea of the scale of this company, just 14 years after its creation, CATL has a market capitalization of $243 billion, a value higher than that of Volkswagen. How is this possible? How did they manage to bring forth a global leader in less than 15 years? There are mainly 2 explanations for this success. The first reason, particularly strategic, lies in the complete control of the supply chain. Indeed, the manufacturing of batteries relies mainly on the use of strategic minerals, particularly for lithium-ion batteries, which power the first modern electric vehicles. The essential materials for this production are mainly lithium, cobalt, nickel, and manganese. To secure these resources, the Chinese government very early on employed its centralized and strategic approach, well before European countries showed genuine interest in the electric sector. Beijing has asked its main state-owned enterprises as well as its large private groups to invest in mines located in all corners of the world, precisely where the minerals essential to battery production are found. This has notably happened with several lithium deposits located in Chile. In the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Chinese companies have acquired 15 of the country's 19 cobalt mines, mainly located in the Katanga region. In Indonesia, nearly 75% of nickel mines are now operated or majority-owned by Chinese companies. This example once again illustrates the effectiveness of China's distinctive development model. In a very short time, the government can mobilize a large number of companies ready to act in a coordinated way to protect the country's strategic interests, and this happens in many sectors. What is even more remarkable in the field of batteries is that, long before the government asked these companies to acquire mines, Chinese players had already mastered the entire process of refining these minerals. Indeed, the lithium from Chile, the cobalt from the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and the nickel from Indonesia were already, for the most part, being transported to China to be refined there. On site, these minerals were refined and transformed into usable materials, which were then used to manufacture various products, including batteries. All in all, the acquisition of these mines merely completed their control over the entire value chain linked to these strategic minerals. This complete control of the process offers many advantages to Chinese battery manufacturers. For SiSTeCATI, for example, this ensured from the very beginning a stable and affordable supply of raw materials, while its competitors, mainly Korean and Japanese such as LG or Panasonic, had to obtain those same minerals on particularly unstable international markets. As a result, SiSTeCATI found itself in a very advantageous position, able to produce the same batteries as its competitors at much lower costs. These competitively priced batteries were then widely used by Chinese electric vehicle manufacturers, further strengthening their already well-established vertical integration. However, among Chinese manufacturers, not all have followed this trend. One of them still continues to resist SiSTeCATI's dominance. It is BYD. Indeed, this company designs and manufactures all of its batteries in-house, making it a unique case on a global scale. This is explained by the fact that originally, BYD was primarily a battery manufacturer, long before diversifying into the automotive sector. Thus, when the government massively supported this sector in the 2010s, BYD took advantage of it to develop its own industrial giant internally. Thanks to this approach, BYD has taken the concept of vertical integration to an exceptionally advanced level. On certain models, only the tires and the windows are not produced in-house. In today's globalized world, achieving such a result is truly a remarkable feat. All of this, as you can imagine, once again allows BYD to significantly reduce its production costs. An aspect that, as you will see, will play an important role later on. In just a few years, the manufacturers will have made more than 20 million euros from it. In just a few years, Chinese manufacturers have already made considerable progress. They even go so far as to address their design challenges by hiring, at high cost, top European automobile designers. This is particularly the case for Wolfgang Egger, former head of design at Audi and Lamborghini. He became head of the design department at BYD in 2007. Conditions are therefore becoming favorable for Chinese manufacturers, who now offer vehicles of increasing quality at ever more competitive prices. Already at that time, Chinese electric vehicles were beginning to compete seriously with those of Tesla. That same year, in 2017, Beijing further strengthened its measures in this area. The Chinese government took the opportunity to launch a new series of subsidies, this time aimed not at manufacturers, but at individuals. In essence, the principle will be similar to that of the environmental bonuses applied in Europe at the same period, but with an essential nuance that will make all the difference. Only electric vehicles equipped with a battery of Chinese origin are considered eligible. Once again, this decision will allow SiSTeCATI to secure numerous contracts and to invest heavily in its research and development. Moreover, the government is avoiding the mistake made in Europe by investing heavily in charging infrastructure. Huge stations, such as the one in Shenzhen that can accommodate more than 200 electric vehicles at the same time, are under construction. Thus, what was bound to happen finally did. For the first time that year, sales of Chinese electric vehicles saw strong growth among private buyers. In the space of a few months, car manufacturers captured a significant share of the market in China. Faced with this strong momentum in the local market, European manufacturers, who at that time remained the main sellers of internal combustion vehicles in China, did not show any real concern. It must be acknowledged that, for the time being, Chinese manufacturers are marketing their vehicles only on the domestic market. Europeans believe that the country's market is so vast that it will be able to absorb this new player without difficulty. Starting in 2018, Chinese manufacturers further stepped up their production pace. Hundreds of new production lines are being automated to further increase manufacturing capacity, as sales are growing strongly. However, this period of prosperity will soon experience a slowdown. Indeed, at the beginning of 2020, China was severely affected by the pandemic, a period that caused a major halt in the country's economic activity. For the first time in 4 decades, the country recorded negative growth in the first quarter of 2020, reaching -6.8%. The way the central government is handling the pandemic has been sharply criticized, while several major cities have been placed under quarantine for more than 2 years. Mechanically, consumption drops sharply because when a household is forced to stay at home, it naturally reduces its spending. Chinese manufacturers, who have not slowed their production pace in the meantime, find themselves with large surpluses. Hundreds of thousands of already manufactured vehicles remain without buyers. The situation is particularly difficult for them because unlike groups such as Volkswagen, which are present in several international markets, Chinese manufacturers had until now sold only in the domestic market. To prevent a series of bankruptcies, Chinese manufacturers have only one option: to identify new markets and export their vehicles there. It is in this unlikely sequence of circumstances that, at the beginning of 2021, much earlier than many experts had anticipated, Chinese automakers set out to conquer global markets. 5,253,000 represents the number of Chinese electric vehicles exported between 2021 and 2023, an increase of 800% compared to the previous 2 years. We can truly speak of a massive phenomenon, as this chart clearly shows. The decision by Chinese manufacturers to launch into exports materialized almost immediately. When I mentioned that BYD was taking the concept of vertical integration very far, it was no exaggeration. The company even had 5 large-capacity vessels like this one built to handle the export of its vehicles around the world itself. This spectacular rise in exports immediately aroused deep concern on a global scale, which is entirely understandable. These Chinese vehicles designed for export already stand out for their many remarkable qualities. They display an excellent technological level, incorporate SiSTeCATI's most advanced batteries, and, above all, are offered at a cost about 30% lower than that of equivalent models from their competitors. In response to this development, many countries are implementing large-scale measures. India, Turkey, and the United States are offsetting the competitiveness of these Chinese vehicles by imposing high customs duties in order to protect their domestic market. The United States even plans to impose tariffs of up to 100% on Chinese electric vehicles, which represents a particularly significant measure. If the Americans can afford to make such a decision, it is because they do not fear significant retaliation from Beijing. Indeed, American manufacturers such as Ford or General Motors now make very few sales in China, which considerably limits Beijing's leverage over them. The only notable exception remains Tesla, which makes significant sales in China, but the Californian company has managed to adopt an appropriate strategy. Since 2019, all Teslas sold in China have also been produced locally at the Shanghai Gigafactory. Interestingly, according to Elon Musk, the Shanghai Gigafactory is said to produce the most refined Teslas in terms of finish, even though the group also has factories in Germany and the United States. The cars we produce here are not only the most efficient in terms of manufacturing, but also the ones offering the best quality. This once again illustrates the remarkable quality of the industrial fabric that has developed in China in just a few years. Well, now that this has been clarified, I'll let you imagine which of the few markets has remained accessible to all these Chinese exports. Yes, it is of course Europe. But how can this be explained? Why were 100% customs duties not applied as the United States did? First of all, there is a political reason. Historically, the European Union has maintained a strong tradition of free trade. Oh yes, it is precisely on these principles that it was founded. Imposing 100% customs duties would have been considered contrary to its principles and, above all, disproportionate in light of the rules of the WTO, the World Trade Organization, which the European Union strictly adheres to, unlike certain other players. That therefore represents part of the explanation. The other reason is that, unlike American manufacturers, European builders still remain heavily dependent on the Chinese market. Yes, even though the trend is starting to reverse, European manufacturers still make a significant share of their sales in China today. In 2024, Volkswagen was still generating 32% of its revenue in China, which is considerable. In the same year, BMW reached 29%. Thus, if the European Union decided to impose 100% customs duties to protect its market, Beijing would immediately respond with comparable retaliatory measures. It goes without saying that if a trade conflict were to break out between Europe and China, it would be Europe above all that would suffer the consequences, so it is better to avoid it. Here, then, are the two main reasons why Europe does not want to close its market to Chinese vehicles. As you can imagine, this is a major problem that is likely to worsen in the future. But why do I say that? I say this because Chinese manufacturers are, by their very nature, already impossible to catch up with. Let me explain. Remember, around the year 2015, European manufacturers faced great difficulties in starting their transition to electric vehicles, and that was for all the reasons we have already mentioned. At that time, they were significantly behind Tesla, which enjoyed a clear lead, particularly in terms of technology and software. However, the delay of European manufacturers compared with Tesla was still largely surmountable, for two main reasons. Firstly, because European manufacturers remain very efficient. It is true that I may have given a somewhat critical impression so far, since they went through a difficult period in the 2010s. Nevertheless, they are still extremely powerful companies, endowed with considerable financial resources, highly skilled engineers, and world-renowned design offices. They certainly experienced a slight delay in their transition to electric vehicles due to their deeply rooted traditions, but nothing was yet lost. In reality, Tesla and the European manufacturers, despite their differences, are operating on the same playing field and under the same rules, which is an essential point to understand. Specifically, they respond to the same market dynamics, the same labor costs, the same trade regulations, and the same environmental standards. Thus, nothing prevented Volkswagen, Renault, or BMW from adopting Tesla's best practices, vertically integrating their production, and drawing inspiration from the cost structures as well as the business model of the Californian manufacturer in order to get as close as possible to it. It would take time, represent a real challenge, and require considerable investment, but it was entirely achievable, and in fact, that is partly what happened. In 2025, European electric vehicles have significantly improved compared to previous years. The quality gap that existed between Tesla and the European manufacturers in 2018 has significantly narrowed, which is quite logical, as this is how our economies evolve. When a new player disrupts a market, the others always end up adapting by incorporating these innovations and gradually regaining ground. That is precisely what happened, for example, in the smartphone sector. Apple profoundly transformed the market in 2007 with the launch of the iPhone. However, its competitors quickly adapted, incorporated the best ideas from that device, and the competition completely reorganized around this new standard. That is exactly what was happening between European manufacturers and Tesla, which made the situation quite predictable. European manufacturers were gradually going to regain ground and, sooner or later, managed to compete more or less with Tesla. What was, however, difficult to foresee was that, in barely 10 years, other manufacturers, particularly Chinese ones, would be able to faithfully reproduce Tesla's innovations while offering them at about 40% lower cost. Indeed, That is where the real problem lies. If Chinese manufacturers have managed to achieve this, it is mainly because they are not subject to the same regulations as other market players. They benefit from the support of a particularly powerful politico-industrial apparatus, which rigorously applies a model of socialism unique to China. It is able, as has been observed on several occasions, to quickly modify its economic rules when national interest requires it, to grant public loans at very favorable rates, and to implement large-scale subsidies. It is precisely this that has made it possible to develop a truly unique industrial fabric. Let us take, for example, the issue of subsidies. According to a report by the Center for Strategic and International Studies, a recognized American research institute, China's electric vehicle industry is estimated to have received about $230 billion in public subsidies between 2009 and 2023 to support the development of this important sector. I will share the corresponding report in the description. You'll see, it is particularly interesting. By the way, I'd like to point out that all my other sources can also be found in the description. With just those 230 billion, it's already clear why Chinese manufacturers enjoy an advantage that's nearly impossible to catch up with. They now operate in a completely different category from that of the other players. No Western government could support its industry on such a scale, whether from a legal, political, or budgetary standpoint. Today, there are two ways to start an online business. The first is to do everything manually, as was done in the 2000s. Producing content manually, writing sales copy, designing visuals. All tasks that can take months and wear you out. The second option is to use artificial intelligence to handle the heaviest tasks, so you can make your business a success in just a few days instead of several months. Which approach suits you best? My name is Edmund Lowe. Over the past few years, I have generated several million in revenue through the sale of digital products and services exclusively online. What once took me months of work can now be accomplished in a few days, or even a few hours, thanks to artificial intelligence. Most people try to grow their online business by creating their products from scratch, writing sales copy, and building complex pages, with the aim of addressing these unfair imbalances. Thus, in September 2023, the European Commission announced the launch of an investigation into subsidies granted to electric vehicles manufactured in China. Global markets are now flooded with Chinese electric cars offered at higher prices. Their price is kept artificially low thanks to significant public subsidies. This investigation led to the introduction of countervailing duties of up to 35% on Chinese electric vehicles imported into Europe. In response, China also launched its own investigations into state aid granted to European products. But this move did not have any significant follow-up, as the WTO ultimately ruled in favor of the European Union. Thus, the solution seemed obvious thanks to the implementation of these countervailing duties. The competitiveness of European electric vehicles has clearly recovered. The starting price of the BYD Dolphin is now set at €29,000. It now costs only €6,000 less than its main competitor, the well-known Volkswagen ID.3. Previously, the price difference reached €9,000. Faced with these new countervailing duties, the only remaining option for Chinese manufacturers was to adopt in Europe the same approach that Tesla had implemented in China with its Shanghai Gigafactory, to produce their vehicles directly in the target market in order to avoid import taxes. Obviously, faced with this serious threat to European industry, the 27 member states of the Union did not allow Chinese manufacturers to establish themselves freely. They formed a united front against the Chinese manufacturers and, true to their usual practice, showed exemplary cohesion in the face of this great contemporary challenge.
Do you know Viktor Orban?
Viktor Orban, Prime Minister of Hungary, known for his pronounced Euroscepticism, has recently stood out for his tendency to criticize the difficulties he himself helps to create. Indeed, he keeps claiming that Europe is losing its dynamism and competitiveness, even though it was he himself who proudly announced in March 2023 the establishment of BYD's first assembly plant on the old continent, a project worth more than €4 billion planned for the Hungarian city of Szeged. Its opening is scheduled for January 2026. The deadline is fast approaching, and this will once again allow BYD to avoid the well-known countervailing duties. Viktor Orban did not stop while he was ahead. I'll let you imagine with which other Chinese company he has also formed a partnership. This company is not a car manufacturer, but rather a battery producer, which may seem even more significant. It is, in fact, CATL, the other major Chinese industrial player. This time, it is no longer a €4 billion project, but rather €7.3 billion. According to a similar schedule, the CATL plant is also expected to be commissioned at the beginning of 2026, thus enabling it to supply the continent on a large scale with its affordable and high-performance batteries. Thus, in just a few years, Hungary has become China's main foothold for accessing the European market. To give an impressive statistic, for the past 3 years, Hungary has been the country in the world where China has made the largest investments. It is truly remarkable for a country with only 9 million inhabitants. You will therefore have understood that, thanks to Hungary, an external player has now found a privileged access route to the European market. And all this is causing serious concern about the future of our manufacturers. In light of everything we have discussed, as you will have understood, our European manufacturers are now facing serious difficulties in the face of strong competition from China. What complicates the situation is that the transition to electric vehicles in Europe has not progressed at the expected pace. Indeed, even though the quality of European electric vehicles has improved considerably in recent years, as we have observed, they still struggle to convince middle-class households for largely the same reasons. Their cost remains high, battery performance is still limited, and charging infrastructure has not yet been sufficiently deployed. As a result, the heavy investments made by European manufacturers in the electric sector are struggling to become profitable. To give you an idea of the scale of the situation, Volkswagen has already invested nearly €60 billion in this transition, which represents a considerable sum. Added to this is the impact of the conflict in Ukraine, which has sharply driven up energy costs in Europe, notably due to the shutdown of the Nord Stream pipeline, once the main supplier of low-cost Russian gas to the continent. Thus, European manufacturers are trying to reduce their expenses by every possible means in order to avoid having to offer their Clio model at a price approaching €40,000. The first noticeable consequence of this situation is a significant shift of interest toward the East. Indeed, for several years, European manufacturers have been opening more and more factories in Eastern European countries, where labor costs are lower. Volkswagen is now firmly established in Slovakia. In Hungary, BMW and Mercedes are preparing to join BYD to expand their operations there. In Poland, the Stellantis Group, formed from the merger between Peugeot Citroën and Fiat Chrysler, now holds a particularly important position. For every new factory established in Eastern Europe, an increasing number of sites located in Western Europe become weakened, creating significant difficulties. Indeed, in our region, many towns were built around the automobile industry and continue to depend heavily on it. Let us take, for example, the case of the Sokoksmont-Billiard urban area, a territory where Peugeot's historic factory represents much more than just an employer. It embodies the living heart of the department, a cornerstone that is at once economic, cultural, and nearly part of its identity, around which several generations have taken shape. In Germany, the situation is perhaps even more striking, particularly with the events taking place in the city of Wolfsburg. Wolfsburg, the emblematic headquarters of Volkswagen, is home to a vast industrial complex that alone occupies nearly 40% of the city's area. Inside, more than 65,000 employees are busy between the vast production site and the administrative buildings. One can easily imagine the considerable consequences that a possible closure of this factory would have. For the moment, however, this scenario does not concern the one in Wolfsburg. On the other hand, for the Volkswagen factories located in Osnabrück, Dresden, and Emden, the situation seems more urgent. Last February 28th, another factory belonging to the Volkswagen Group ceased operations. It is the Audi site in Brussels. The former production site of the Audi Q8 e-tron saw 3,000 employees affected by the shutdown of operations. On September 25th, it was Bosch's turn to be affected. Remember that automotive supplier that announced one of the biggest reorganization plans of the decade, affecting 13,000 employees across Europe. Thus, the difficulties do not concern only the manufacturers. It is the entire European automobile industry as a whole that is affected. When it is not a matter of job cuts or site closures, it is long periods of partial activity that follow one after another. This has been observed recently in the Stellantis plant in Poissy, as well as in the one in Socox, which I mentioned just before. They were temporarily shut down for 3 weeks last month in order to adjust production in response to declining demand. Thus, it is easy to imagine that the combination of an unfavorable market and the massive arrival of Chinese manufacturers, which is only just beginning, is causing serious concerns for the future. It is truly concerning because, as a reminder, in 2024 the automotive sector directly employed 13.8 million Europeans, which is a considerable figure. Thus, after having addressed all these elements, a legitimate question arises. Are there still possible solutions for European car manufacturers? Can they still be helped? Well, as you are about to see, the situation appears quite complex. One of the first approaches considered was to strengthen the competitiveness of European electric vehicles by developing a battery manufacturer based on the continent. In principle, the idea was quite simple: to create at the European level a true competitor to SiSTeCATI, a sort of Airbus for batteries. This would allow European manufacturers to reduce their dependence on Chinese and Korean companies, thereby strengthening their autonomy. One of the first companies to enter this sector and attempt to meet this challenge was Northvolt. Northvolt is a young Swedish company founded in 2015 by former Tesla executives. She had set herself a clear goal: to produce lithium-ion batteries on a large scale in Europe. To achieve this goal, the company raised significant funds, a total of 13.6 billion euros, from investors such as Volkswagen and Goldman Sachs. It also benefited from substantial public support, amounting to about 1 billion euros in subsidies. Thus, Northvolt was truly regarded as a promising technology company on which many stakeholders had placed their bets, but things did not go as planned. Indeed, if I speak of it in the past tense, it is not without reason. Northvolt filed for bankruptcy last March. The company failed during a particularly complex phase for battery manufacturers, called the ramp-up phase. It's quite a complex topic that could by itself be the subject of a full video. In summary, the ramp-up, or industrial scale-up, corresponds to the phase during which battery manufacturers must move from producing a few thousand cells in the laboratory to manufacturing millions of identical cells in a gigafactory. In summary, it is the phase during which the process must be transformed into a true industrial production. It is an extremely complex stage for many reasons, and even companies with solid financing can encounter great difficulties there. That is precisely what happened to Northvolt. The other major European initiative in the field of batteries, widely discussed in France in recent years, is of course Verker. Verker, a Grenoble-based startup founded in 2020, can be considered the younger sister of Northvolt. It has also raised significant capital, exceeding a total of 2 billion euros. Its first gigafactory is currently in the finalization phase in Bourbourg, not far from Dunkirk. This gigafactory is expected to start supplying the Renault Group with high-performance batteries from 2027, particularly for Alpine's new fully electric range. The start of the ramp-up is scheduled for the end of 2026 at Verker. Let's hope everything goes smoothly, unlike the experience of its sister company. Finally, the latest European project in the field of batteries, the one that on paper probably comes closest to the Airbus model, is ACC. ACC is a joint venture founded by 3 major European players: Stellantis, Mercedes, and TotalEnergies. It is probably the initiative that, on paper, seemed the most solid, but once again, many problems have arisen. The ACC Gigafactory, located near Billy-Bear-Claw, close to Lille, is experiencing significant production delays as well as budget overruns. The batteries it currently manufactures remain about 25% more expensive than those of the Asian competition. Thus, even when three of the continent's largest companies join forces and the project does not go as planned, it is a worrying sign for the entire sector. But above all, it shows how much CATL benefits from a considerable advantage in the current situation. Indeed, CATL passed through the scale-up phase without difficulty during the 2010s, as the company was then benefiting from substantial public subsidies in China, which allowed it to postpone the search for a viable business model. In Europe, if a company does not have a solid business model from the very start of industrializing its battery production, it quickly risks bankruptcy, as was the case for SiSTeCATI. Here, when I mention that Chinese players do not operate under the same conditions as we do, this example is particularly revealing. Added to this is the difficulty of controlling the entire value chain within the European territory. In Europe, we could also have acquired, like China, deposits of strategic metals. Admittedly, the cost is very high, but in theory, it remains achievable. On the other hand, what turns out to be practically impossible is ensuring the refining of these metals in Europe. Indeed, the refining of lithium or cobalt is among the most polluting activities worldwide. This process results in the release of large quantities of heavy metals into the environment. In China, the authorities show a certain tolerance on this matter, given the strategic importance of this activity. In Europe, this is completely unfeasible because our environmental regulations are much stricter. Thus, even if we acquire deposits, there will always remain this gap in the value chain. We will be forced to send our metals to be refined in less strict countries, which cancels out all the initial advantage. In summary, all this shows that the goal of making Europe a leader in the field of batteries already seems compromised. Since the battery is the central component of a high-performance electric vehicle, this leads us to the second solution, which I am sure many of you have already thought of. Indeed, if we are unable to compete, why not temporarily set aside our ambitions related to electric vehicles, reconsider the 2035 measure, and fully relaunch the internal combustion engine sector? At first glance, this might seem like a loophole for our manufacturers, but in reality, it would not be one. It would actually be an even less favorable situation. And this for a very simple reason. The combustion engine now belongs to the past. Indeed, if Europe backtracks on electric vehicles to return to combustion engines, the rest of the world will keep moving forward without waiting. In Asia alone, for example, the adoption of electric vehicles will continue to grow. President Xi Jinping stated that by 2040, all new vehicles sold in China would be fully electric. Thus, by around 2050, about 10 years later, the entire Chinese automobile fleet will be almost completely electrified. If Europeans persist in favoring combustion engines, they will no longer be able to sell their vehicles in China starting in 2040. And as we have observed, this seems completely unthinkable to them, since they rely heavily on this market. Thus, returning to combustion engines is by no means a solution for the future, especially since electric technology will continue to advance considerably. Indeed, it has only been about 15 years that engineers around the world have devoted themselves to developing electric technology and batteries, which is ultimately a short time when you put things into perspective. Significant progress is therefore expected in this field, and it is already beginning to show. BYD recently unveiled its ultra-fast charging batteries, capable of delivering 400 kilometers of range in just 5 minutes. Thus, we are literally talking about a system where charging a vehicle will soon take as much time, or even less, than filling a gas tank. And beyond the rational aspect of progress, this return to combustion engines is simply impossible for an obvious reason. European manufacturers have, for the most part, already made their transition some time ago. Indeed, most manufacturers had already made their investments in electric vehicles by the late 2010s. The new platforms are already designed, the production lines have been set up, and the new models are drawn. Let me remind you, Volkswagen has invested about 60 billion in the development of all these projects. 60 billion. It is impossible to turn back after investments of such magnitude. The question we can now ask ourselves is the following. Why has the European Commission recently backtracked on the well-known 2035 decree? Regarding the step back on combustion engines, it is neither a complete change of strategy nor an abandonment of the electric path, but rather an urgent adjustment, widely requested by German manufacturers facing significant difficulties. Due to still insufficient demand for electric vehicles in Europe, manufacturers have no other option than to restart the production of combustion or hybrid engines in order to generate revenue and stabilize their financial situation. It is literally a matter of survival for these companies. It must be clearly understood that this situation deeply irritates them, as it turns out to be extremely counterproductive. Indeed, every minute invested and every euro spent on redeveloping a combustion engine, such as that of the future Porsche Cayenne planned for 2026, represents resources that will not be devoted to strengthening Porsche's electric offering. This therefore results in a delay that naturally widens compared with the Chinese manufacturers. Indeed, Chinese manufacturers have invested heavily in electric vehicles from the outset and do not have to manage two strategies simultaneously to ensure their long-term viability. And of course, if I take the example of Porsche, this also applies to all the European manufacturers I mentioned. If, at the present time, they had the opportunity to sell only electric cars, they would do so without hesitation, because they have already invested in this approach and are just waiting for it. Once again, European manufacturers have long since chosen to move toward a new kind of mobility. This U-turn by the European Commission thus appears to be a token measure, reflecting an admission of failure. It is literally a temporary retreat to avoid sinking immediately, while risking a bigger fall later on. In short, as you will have understood, a complete return to combustion engines is not really a true solution either. On the other hand, a possible solution for European manufacturers to reduce losses would be to open up to new markets. Indeed, this could be an excellent way to regain market share with relative ease and to give real momentum back to the activity. Thus, when taking stock, the majority of European manufacturers already achieve a significant share of their sales in Asia and also in the United States. In the Middle East, demand remains relatively limited, as it does in Africa. But then, which region of the world still remains accessible, with significant demand, and where some European manufacturers are not yet present? Well, yes, it is South America. With a population of about 300 million inhabitants with relatively high purchasing power, this would represent an excellent opportunity for European manufacturers. And indeed, the topic is particularly relevant at the moment. Oh yes, you may have heard about the negotiations concerning the free trade agreement between the European Union and Mercosur. This agreement, if it comes into force, could greatly open the doors of this South American market to European manufacturers. It would remove a large part of the customs barriers that currently make our cars too expensive in this region. The main issue of this agreement is that it could no doubt provide limited assistance to our manufacturers. On the other hand, what is certain is that in Europe, this would seriously put our farmers in difficulty. So, can we really regard this as a desirable solution? Nothing is certain. Finally, one of the remaining solutions, which this time could truly work, is to aim for moving upmarket. And yes, it's not a meaningless idea, because when you take stock, Chinese manufacturers will probably be superior in almost every area in the future: technology, performance, and prices. On the other hand, the only advantage that will likely remain for European manufacturers will be their brand image. Indeed, in this field, Aston Martin, Rolls-Royce, and Ferrari enjoy a lead that even 20 years of sustained effort could not close. Their logos evoke a history, a particular conception of European engineering, and a distinctive vision of the automobile. This is the last real opportunity for Europeans to position themselves in segments where the quality-to-price ratio is not the main selling point. As you can imagine, the main challenge of this strategy lies in the fact that it cannot be adopted by everyone. Indeed, the vast majority of current European manufacturers are not really positioning themselves in the premium segment. For 50 years, their true success has been based on the car accessible to everyone. Models such as the Clio, the 308, or the Golf. It is precisely these manufacturers who find themselves particularly threatened, for whom moving toward an upscale range would go against their original identity. The Renaults, Seats, Peugeots, Fiats, Volkswagens, Opels, and Skodas. Indeed, a Skoda Superb would never in the past have provoked the slightest criticism. Indeed, since BYD's arrival in Hungary triggered a new dynamic in the market, European manufacturers have found themselves facing an unprecedented situation. European manufacturers have responded by forming partnerships with BYD's competitors. This is precisely the strategy adopted by Stellantis with Leapmotor. Stellantis has recently opened its European production sites to Chinese manufacturers so that they can assemble, within the region, models that were originally developed in China. For now, these are partnerships in which each party finds its own advantage. Leapmotor maintains the activity of Stellantis's production lines, which would otherwise risk being shut down due to insufficient demand. In return, Stellantis ensures the distribution of Leapmotor vehicles through its extensive dealership network across Europe, including those of Citroën, Peugeot, and Fiat. For Chinese manufacturers, this is particularly advantageous, as it offers them a gradual and controlled entry into the European market. Indeed, Chinese vehicles still suffer slightly from a lack of positive image due to their past history. The fact of discovering these vehicles at one's usual dealership, the one visited for 20 years to buy a 208 or a 3008, and where the sales advisor is well known, greatly reassures potential customers and thus encourages broader adoption. Stellantis is not the only one involved in complex undertakings, of course. Renault is also adopting this approach in partnership with Geely. Currently, a possible partnership between Volkswagen and Xiaopeng is also being discussed, although no official agreement has yet been concluded. Thus, Stellantis is by no means an isolated case. Its partnerships, however, raise certain questions. Nowadays, these initiatives are presented as strategic partnerships based on mutually beneficial cooperation. However, over the years, Chinese manufacturers will continue to grow, improve their technologies, and optimize their costs, while European manufacturers will appear to follow an opposite trajectory. These partnerships will, in any case, gradually become less and less balanced over time. Each year, Chinese companies will gradually strengthen their bargaining power, and that is where the main risk lies. There will probably be no spectacular upheavals or sudden bankruptcies, no. The process will be much more discreet and gradual, a succession of essential compromises for European players, with shared platforms, reused software, and integrated batteries, until the moment when most of the key expertise will no longer be in Europe, but in China. At that stage, Chinese manufacturers will be able to reproduce the model that had been imposed on them in the 1990s, allowing us to assemble their vehicles in our factories while retaining exclusivity over their key technologies. There we are. That's the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed it. It wasn't an easy task to sum up 40 years of changes in the automobile market. There are certain topics I had to cover quickly, so please feel free to add your clarifications in the comments. If you enjoyed the video, remember to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Your support really helps its growth, so a big thank you to everyone who does so. A big thank you to NordVPN for supporting the channel. Let me remind you that you can still take advantage of their special offer.